How's it going, guys? So the last time I made a video was when we were getting the mountain event rerun, and I was saying like, oh yeah, mountain is gonna be a really good operator to get before season seven. Season seven, remember that? I hope he ended up being pretty useful for you guys. For me personally, throughout the long June June, the month of CC, I had a lot of fun in roguelike in the CN server. Because obviously I've already done reach 32 on Season 7 in my Chinese account, which is even inferior in terms of operator strength to my English servers. I just didn't bother doing the same thing on my EN account. But the operators that I land out did get Risk 32 done for other people. So, I mean, you could pretty much say that I got Risk 32 as well. So, I think that's a fair point to make. So, after a whole month of pretty much a whole month of CC stuff, we just got announcement for a new event, Break the Ice, that will be coming soon on June 30th. And obviously, when it comes to a new event, we're gonna get new operators, new story, and obviously a new 6-star banner. And this time around, obviously, I will be making a Shuju pool video. And it will be a little bit more of a lot of explanation that I have to make. But in general, I would say I would 100% for most people to pull Gnosis. Now, hear me out. Gnosis is a 6-star hexer. So hexers are like Chimera as example. So as you can see, he has the exact same attack range as Chimera. He has low attack, low deployment cost, and high resistance. Pretty good that like they end up being really useful when you need them, just like Chimera. But obviously he plays nothing like Chimera. So let me explain how he works. First, let's look at his talents. So his first talent is that whenever he attacks an enemy, he will apply a 1-second hold. So what is cold is, I think it was introduced to us in chapter 6. You remember the exploding spiders and the casters, and then if you have cold, 2 layers of cold, you will get frozen. We can actually do the same thing for us now. So he applies 1 second of cold to enemies. In his attack area, enemies with cold will have 25% fragile. If enemies in his attack area are frozen, the fragile effect is doubled to 50%. That will actually go up by base of 2%, so 27% of fragile if you get potential 5, and then double that 54% if you have P5. But I don't think it's really worth it to go to P5 personally. I'm just not that kind of a whale. His second talent is that when Gnosis is on the field and has been deployed for more than 10 seconds, all operators from Call and Trade will have resist. So the duration of debuffs is halved. So stun 10 seconds stun time becomes 5 seconds stun time, pretty much. So as you can see, his whole skill set is going to be based around the fact that he can cause freeze, cause cold, and then hence freeze. Now, as you can see, his cold only lasts for 1 second, while his attack duration, attack interval, is actually 1.6 seconds. So obviously, normally he won't be causing freeze on enemies. That will have to depend on his skill. Or if you have a lot of attack speed, that will be a different story. But obviously, we're not going to discuss that now. That would be CC. So as you can already tell, this is a brand new type of operator, brand new type of mechanic that we're going to be playing around here. And because it is a new mechanic, a lot of older enemies don't have resistance against cold and freeze. And even in the future, there might not be a lot of, and like, it depends, right? It depends if they remember to have cold and freeze resistance on the enemies. But first, let's look at his skills, right? There's a lot more with Gnosis. Now, his first skill is really simple with 4 SP. Even at M3, that will only be 4 SP. So, you know, I don't really think it's a big deal to M3 him. His next attack will immediately attack twice, which means pretty much instant freeze any enemy. Each attack will hit twice, right? So that will be 150% arch damage each with both of those hits. That will pretty much mean instant freeze for every 4 seconds. And that would deal 300% arch damage. If you M3 that, that will be 170% each, so 340% total arch damage. As you can tell, M3ing first skill isn't really worth it all around. The SP doesn't really matter because he has low attack to begin with. The extra increase in like 40% arch damage really doesn't affect anything. And I would say that even with his first skill, I wouldn't really recommend using him anyway. I think unless you have a lot of SP regen, like special occasions in CC. By the way, I don't really use him in CC. I don't really use his first skill in CC. I'll talk about why a bit later as we go down to the second and third skill. So skill 1 is just not really recommended from me. Yeah. Skill 2, I only have M2. I'm on my way to M3 it. Okay, just give me some time. But at M3 skill 2, the SP cost of this skill will only be 6. What it does is that it will cost 3 seconds of cold and 180% of arch damage for me now, but it will actually be 200% of arch damage, and it will go to 4 seconds of cold to all enemies in his area. So as you can see, that will be an extra second. And if you overcharge, so if you let it charge once again, so it will be 12 SP in total, it will cause another layer of cold. What that means is instant freeze every enemy in his area for 4 seconds if you M3, compared to 3 seconds if you only M2. That's why I'm working on M3. So as you can see, this is actually a really strong skill. And even just at skill level 7, it is really worth using, because you still get the 7 SP, you still get the 3 seconds, you just get less attack. So you're pretty much what I have right now. And 14 seconds, for every 14 seconds, you can freeze all enemies in his area for 3 seconds. And they will have 50% fragile and all that good stuff. Skill 2 is actually quite decent in a lot of situations, and also you get to control when to freeze enemies, unlike skill 1 when it is actually just automatically triggered. Skill 2, you get to choose when you want to freeze a lot of enemies, and as you freeze enemies of the because of the fragile, you can use skills like, I don't know, True Silver Slash, Volcano, Summer Chen, whatever you like, to deal tons of damage as they're frozen in place and just kill a bunch of them at the same time. Actually a really good skill, but as you can see, my default skill is skill 3, and there's a reason to that, and my first M3 skill from Gnosis. So, skill 3 for Gnosis, you have a initial SP of 25, only costs 40 SP to use. Duration lasts 13 seconds, which it might not sound like a lot compared to the 40 seconds of cooldown, but the effect is actually worth it. Now, during his skill duration, he will have plus 130 attack speed, can attack 2 enemies at the same time, and for all enemies in his attack area, their froze time, the time that they're frozen, will extend to the time his skill ends. And so depending on when they're frozen, you can freeze enemies for up to 13 seconds. Maybe not up to 13 seconds. A bit slower because you have to attack them first to freeze them. And as skill ends, all frozen enemy will take 600% of his arch damage and end the freeze. So even though my Gnosis isn't really the max level, it's still not gonna matter much. That, as you can see, there's a reason why I didn't level 90 him, because the attack you gain from skill 3 isn't really that important to begin with. Even if you have 600%, the base damage is just so low, it doesn't matter. What it really matters is that he can freeze enemies for up to 13 seconds. Now, there's also another thing in his skill, is that he will prioritize enemies that aren't frozen. So since that he has plus 130 attack speed, his attack interval rounds up to be roughly 0.7 seconds. So for every 1.4 seconds, he is going to freeze 2 enemies for a total of 9 sets of enemies. So he can freeze up to 18 enemies within his area for the 13 seconds of duration. That is actually very, very OP. The fact that he can freeze 18 enemies, up to 18 enemies, obviously the first enemy that he attack will be frozen first. But what he can really do is, if enemies come in long, like in a wave, right? And then he can start freezing the first ones, and then as more enemies stack up, he can freeze more of them, and that will actually gather up the enemies first, so that you can clear them out with like Summer Chen skill 3. You can save your Summer Chen skill 3 ammo. Then you can have Fragile within that time. And then it's a hard control because a lot of enemies don't have resistance against freeze. So what really makes him good, there's two situations. No, there's only one situation that makes him super good. It's that if the stage designer forgets to implement freeze resistance, then Gnosis is the god tier of controlling, right? Every 40 seconds, he's gonna freeze enemies for 13 seconds. And usually, as you know, nowadays enemies tend to come in waves, not just like a peak amount of enemy at all times. It is actually like waves, so lots of enemies, not much, lots of enemies, not much. So the 40 seconds of cooldown actually fits most enemy waves really well. Usually they will get like they will have a gap of more than 40 seconds between different waves. So when you go with Gnosis skill 3 at skill 3 at M3, it is really easy to match the timing of his skill against enemy waves. That just makes him that much better. Now obviously there's one downside. His whole thing is about freeze, right? So whenever they just like, okay, we don't want you to use freeze, he's immediately trashed. He doesn't do anything the moment enemy gains resist freeze. That actually happens in a future CC. I think it's CC season 9, the one that we just had. Enemies in there just ignores freeze. It's a tag. So it's obviously in those situations you can't rely on Gnosis. But other situations when they forgot to have a counter for Gnosis just beats the crap out of everything. So there's also a new thing. They introduced a new game mode. I'm not going to go into details, but they recently introduced a new game mode in CN, and Gnosis is actually one of my main operator to deal with that mode, because he gets super buffed with like ink plus 200 attack speed and whatnot as long as you stack the buff, and he can just freeze anything that comes into his area and just pretty much carries the whole team forever, like through the whole thing. And that's why I think most people should actually get one copy of Gnosis. You don't have to go for potential. I don't think the potential is worth it. Like you get a bit less in DP, you get a tiny bit more attack, you get like 4% more fragile. I don't think any of them are really worth it. But getting a copy of Gnosis is actually worth it, for me at least. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you would like to see some more Gnosis in action, I'm actually gonna plan to use him in a future video where I'm gonna showcase some roguelikes, so it will be on the line most likely. So if you want to see that, feel free to subscribe to my channel. Also, as we know, Roguelike 2 is going to be coming really soon, and I'm actually going to make quite a lot of videos explaining how this roguelike works, how you get into all the endings, how to deal with stages, what to choose, what not to take, so on and so forth. It's actually going to be a lot that I want to talk about in roguelike, because many of you would know I'm actually hugely addicted to the roguelike mode, Integral Strategies 2. So if you want to see that as well, subscribe. So I'll see you guys in the next one, where most likely I'll be pulling this banner and most likely get really unlucky and get a lot of salt in my comment. I'm used to it. I'll see you guys then. Bye.